class is about this subject of the connection between yoga and Christianity. This is part 2. Most of you attended part 1. Part 1 was really very much around the question of whether Christ really died on the cross or not, and it was an examination of some of the many unofficial scriptures, scriptures that are not recognized by the church, the Catholic Church at least, where there are records of Christ being alive after the crucifixion and many various things. So that's one of the big mystery questions around Christianity and the origins of Christianity primarily, which of course center on the life of Jesus. Another major, probably the other big question is, what was he doing between the ages of 12, that's the last time we hear about him in the official Bible, and 30, which is when he appears in Jerusalem. So what happened during those 18 missing years? What was he doing? And then the other thing we're going to be looking at today is, what if he did survive the crucifixion, what did he do after that? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. But I want to begin with a question for all of you, and that is simply just this question of who is Jesus. Maybe one of you is Jesus. Anybody here would like to, if you let us know if that is the case. I'm very curious. I've actually met at least 3 people who seem to be convinced that they are Jesus, and I dream of getting them all in the same room. I think that would be fascinating. To have them try and decide, and who's the real Jesus. Okay, an interesting comment here from Ananda Dave. Authors David Fitzgerald and Richard Carrier have written books questioning whether Jesus ever existed. I'm sure they have. There are, there is so much mystery about his personality. I haven't read those books. I'm not going to explore that one. But it's true. There is no historical record of the personality of Jesus Christ from the record. The Romans were the ones who kept the records, and they have a record, of course, of Pontius Pilate and Herod, and they were authority figures, and even John the Baptist, as I mentioned last week. But there's no mention of Jesus Christ in the Roman historical records. So we're dependent on the various Gospels and writings. But I'm not going to explore that one, whether he existed or not, because I'm assuming that he did. And I have my own reasons for believing that he did exist. But they might not be the same ones as most Christians. So what I want to tell you, as I said, I've met 3 people who think they're Jesus, so perhaps they took too much LSD or they had some problem. And I've actually been mistaken for Jesus by a child. This was a delightful experience, I must say. Because, I was there I gave a talk at a church. I went through a phase where I was a guest minister at a number of Unitarian and Unity churches. And, this is funny. I'm going to read this out in a minute. I used to give these talks and lead meditation at these sort of alternative, I call them hippie churches, right? But these people were very, very nice people. I made friends with them, and the minister actually took initiation into our meditation, and they were the group where I first gave this workshop on the sort of the mystery of Jesus's early life and so forth. And there was a woman there who had 2 little girls, and they were about 7, and they're twins, identical twins. They were African American actually, and they were these really cute little girls, and they're playing there. And I was at the picnic. They had a picnic for all. They invited the congregation, and I was sitting nearby, and one of the little girls, they were playing just near me, and one of them fell over and hurt her knee or something. She started crying, and she ran over to me because I was the nearest adult, and I kind of comforted her, and that was fine. I sort of made friends with these 2 twin girls. Their mother came to me just afterwards. She said, that was really really unusual. My girls are very shy. They never approach strangers. And she said the reason she came up to you is she thought you were Jesus. And I thought, okay. So one thing I know for sure is I'm not Jesus, okay? I believe he existed, definitely not me, but that was fun. So let me read this out from Advaita. Thanks. What if God was one of us? Just a slob like one of us, just a stranger on the bus, trying to make his way home. If God had a face, what would it look like? And would you want to see it? If seeing meant that you would have to believe in things like heaven and in Jesus and the saints and all the prophets. Is it from a song or something?
Namaskar, it is.
It's a song?
Yes.
That sounds like fun. Okay,
Keeps
Emily,
on going.
good to meet you, Emily. Check out the videos and please join us for meditation anytime you want. We do this every week at the same time.
Thank you.
Great. I often see the God and the divine in the faces I see. That is perhaps the real Jesus. Okay. Very interesting. So I just couldn't resist telling that story about these kids and all the people I met who thought they're Jesus. So there's a lot of speculation about this. So here with what we're doing today. So how did Jesus become a great sage? You know, because seems, at least I think he was clearly what you might say a prophet or a highly enlightened person. And if he didn't die on the cross, what happened next? And what can we learn from all this? And the last thing I'm going to give you, which I know some of you are kind of dying to hear, but I'm keeping it till the end, is what did Sri Anandamurti, my guru, the founder of Anandamarga, what did he say about Jesus? And I've got to qualify this. This is not written in any book. It's not like an official record of what Sri Anandamurti wrote about Jesus, but he spoke about Jesus to a number of different people, and I've been trying to collect that and verify it. So this is the best record that I've been able to find about what he said about Jesus. We'll sum that up at the end, and I think it's pretty interesting. So that's the to keep you sticking around here. Okay, so Lost Years of Jesus. As last 2 weeks ago, was it? Yeah. I referred to this book. This is one that I read, which I found very interesting. It seems pretty authentic. This this information is from this much disputed or discussed or controversial Russian writer Nicholas Nitovich, and he found these Tibetan manuscripts about the early life of Jesus in this monastery in Tibet. And he published his book about the life of Saint Isa, as they apparently called him in India. Published that in 1890. He claimed that Jesus studied in India from 14 to 29 years old and returned there after the crucifixion. Now, he's not the only one to have claimed this, but this is a commonly held belief by a number of different people from different traditions, including a number of people in India, and he was, there are references to him being a prophet or a great yogi, a great sage in India, numerous references. The Anglican Church tried to discredit the book with the support of the British Raj, that's not hard to imagine, ruling India, and they sought any scriptures they could find and destroyed them. There's been a lot of effort over the last, more than 1,000 years to eliminate any possible evidence that the Orthodox view of Christianity and the Orthodox version is not correct. So a lot of possible alternative evidence has actually been destroyed. And then there's the big question of some of it may have been kept in the Vatican as secretly. So one day that'll all come out, I guess. So let's pick up where we left off last week, where, maybe Jesus didn't die on the cross. I think he didn't. And what did he do next? So there are a few different theories on this, but the most popular or common one, most widely accepted, is that he traveled probably with his mother and some disciples, certainly but not alone, over this common trade route. This is a very well traveled trade route at the time, across the Middle East, across Iran and what is now Iran and Afghanistan, into northern India. And Srinagar, you can see on the map there, is in the north of India, in Kashmir. There is an alternative version of this where they claim that some people believe that he actually went in the other direction, that he went to the west, and he ended up in France and got married and has living descendants in France, and that's where you get this popular story. That's what the Da Vinci Code is based on. But that theory doesn't seem to be as well supported, and it doesn't make as much sense. Because imagine if you've just been persecuted and tortured and they tried to kill you, and you're a wanted man, okay, and you want to escape from the Roman authorities. Do you go to the west into the heart of the Roman Empire, right? Because Jerusalem, Israel or Palestine was on the edge of the Roman Empire. It was on the eastern edge. Or do you go somewhere where the Romans have no say, have no power, and have no presence, and go to in the other direction towards India, especially if maybe you've already been there, which is what a lot of people believe. So it just makes much more sense to me that he would have gone away from the Romans, who clearly were going to give him trouble if they could. So this is the version that I think is the most likely. Okay. Just one, there are many references to this, but there are many places in northern India that are named after Jesus and his mother. That's why a lot of people believe he travelled with his mother. At the border of a small town called Mari, there is nearby a mountain called Pindi Point, which is an old tomb called Mai Mari Da Astan, or the final resting place of Mary. So his mother's tomb, or at least reputedly his mother's tomb, is there. The Muslims venerate this as the grave of Isa's mother, or Christ's mother. And in last session I showed you the quote from the Quran talking about Jesus as a prophet. The tomb itself is oriented east-west, which is consistent with the Jewish tradition, despite the fact that it is within a Muslim area. So that's considered to be an indication that this may not be this is a very different type of tomb. And the same is true of the tomb they claim to belong to Jesus himself, which is here. So this is where a lot of people believe Jesus was buried. It is in Kashmir, and this is the building, and you can see, well, it's of course in both Arabic, because this is actually a Muslim shrine, as you can see from the Arabic writing, and it's a shrine of a Muslim saint, but also of Jesus, or Isa as they called him. And inside the shrine they have this artifact, which is, of course, it's not an actual footprint of it's representing Jesus's feet, but you can see the scars on his feet, which presumably would have been from the crucifixion experience. So that's one interesting piece there. This is beneath that. This is underground, below that shrine. This is what's considered to be the actual tomb of Jesus, and it is oriented in the manner of a Jewish tomb rather than a Muslim one. So that's the possible resting place of Jesus Christ. So I'm not going to go more into the historical stuff, but beyond saying that there is this idea that he went to the east and studied there, became studied under spiritual masters, and I'll look at that a bit more in detail at the end. But I just want to draw parallels between Christian teaching, particularly New Testament teaching, and the sort of tradition of Dharma and Buddhism, particularly Tantric Buddhism, which was what was the sort of mystical tradition of Kashmir at that time. It seems likely, a lot of people claim, that he was basically a Buddhist monk, that he was initiated into a form of tantric practice, meditation practice, which was practiced by the Buddhist adepts, and that he was effectively like a Buddhist lama. and that he learned this meditation and he studied their scriptures and adopted their ideas and brought them to Palestine. So there was this contrast between what Jesus was teaching and what was the Judaic tradition. There are a lot of differences. This is not, his teachings look much more like Buddhism than they look like Judaism of that time. But I just want to draw some general parallels here, showing how there's a lot of overlap and migration of ideas and words evolving from one tradition to another. So a word like Om clearly has become Amen. That looks pretty obvious. Abraham was a Brahmin. That's the connection there. This is from the Old Testament, of course. The Garden of Eden metaphor is it's a really good metaphor for human beings reaching the point in our evolution where we become self-aware, which is how we would view this process through the lens of yoga philosophy, and you know, any what I would call a rational spiritual view of what's happened, how human beings became what they are. There is this idea in the Old Testament that man is made, or humans are made in God's image. These concepts of Mahatattva. So Mahatattva is our sense of self-awareness or awakened intuition. The Atman is the self-aware soul, if you like, and the Paramatman is the supreme I, the supreme being. And this idea that we are created in God's image appears in yoga philosophy, in this terminology, describing how our spirit, if you like, or our sense of existence is a reflection of the cosmic sense of existence. And we are like picking that up, like we are like radio antenna, and we're picking up this universal transmission of awareness. We are created in the image of the Creator. And that is the way I would interpret that idea, that we humans are created in the image of the divine. And of course, typically it's taken very literally in some, in Christian teaching, that the human body is somehow looks like God. Okay, this is a very simplistic, literalistic, kind of childlike interpretation of a philosophical idea. You get a lot of that. Early versions of the Bible talked about reincarnation. This is prior to the what became the official Bible. But there are definitely a number of early versions of the Bible that talked about Christianity, and we see indications of that concept in sayings such as you sow, so you shall reap. That is effectively, in a nutshell, the law of karma, which is the foundation of the concept of reincarnation. This idea that we get from the Christian fundamentalism, where they sort of interpret, Jesus saying that there's, I am the way, the truth, and the light. There's no way to the Father but through me. If you take that and put it next to these statements, which is from the New Testament, of course, supposedly the words of Jesus says, "I and the Father are one, and the kingdom of heaven is within you." Effectively, he's saying that, there's no way to if you combine that with the other statements, he's saying, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man come unto the Father but by me." But who is he? He is the Father. And where is the Father? The kingdom of heaven, which is within you. In other words, God is within you. To a mystical interpretation of this, or even a literal one, indicates that. But many Christians will say this is to say that God is within you is sacrilege. It's blasphemy, and it's the supreme egotism and all of this. But really, what we're saying is that the divine is reflected within me, and that's what I meditate upon. There's this concept, or this. This is part, of course, of a much longer passage about praying unceasingly. In Sanskrit, or in Dharma Niyama, in yoga, we have this concept of brahmacharya. So we're always remembering that the divine is within everything. There's a beautiful book called The Way of a Pilgrim. Has anyone read this? The Way of a Pilgrim? It's a very interesting book.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with some of the Orthodox church teachings where there's a prayer. It's called the Prayer of the Heart, or the
Right.
Jesus.
Yep.
And the idea is like, I mean, if you translate it to English, it's you say, Christ, have mercy on me.
Right.
And the idea is like you say it, or you start out saying it like when you're breathing, as a meditation.
Yep.
And supposedly, like if you do it enough, you get to the point like every time you take a breath, you're saying a prayer. And then if you go even deeper into it, and you pray for years and years, that every time your heart beats, you're saying a prayer.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful. So it's I believe this practice comes from this book. Um, Certainly, that's where I've read about it anyway, or maybe he learned it from somewhere else. But this book, The Way of a Pilgrim, which is very short, by the way, it's super inspiring. If you're practicing meditation with a mantra, you should read this book because it'll really show you how powerful it can be if you practice it intensely for a long period. It's tremendously inspiring.
Isn't there a Buddhist walking meditation, and they often take it on a pilgrimage where every step they are repeating a particular mantra,
Yeah,
often their personal mantra?
that is a Buddhist practice. That's true. So,
Another comment that I would like to make when you talked about the kingdom of heaven being within you
mhm.
is that many dogmatic Christians, the evangelistic ones especially, will say that Jesus or God doesn't live in the heart of the sinner, which completely contradicts their statement of God living everywhere.
Yeah, there's many contradictions. That's a good point. Yeah, there, the literalistic interpretation that we come across in fundamentalism in Christianity is completely irrational, and it's self-contradictory. It's inconsistent, and that's why I think you don't have to study in great depth to understand these actually fairly simple points. I mean, I remember I was once traveling on a train from it was in Australia. It was a 2 hour journey, and I found myself sitting next to a young man who seemed like a very nice young man, and we started talking. And he had just completed his studies for 2 years in some kind of seminary. So he was studying to be a preacher in a fundamentalist tradition. But I really liked this guy, and I felt sort of sad that he seemed so pure and sincere, and I felt like, oh my God, he's been following this thing that is, I don't think it's really going to help him a lot, and he's going to be telling other people as well. So normally I don't get into long discussions with fundamentalists because I've found it to be rather fruitless. But in this case, I thought, no, I really want to talk to this guy, and we talked for a long time. We had 2 hours, and I just explained to him a couple of the inherent contradictions in his belief system, and so I asked him. I said, "So it wasn't specifically these ones that we've referred to." I said, "So you believe God to be benevolent and all-loving?" And he said, "Oh yes, definitely." I said, "Okay, that's great. I believe that too." And and that he's as this definition here, that God is omnipotent, means he's all powerful, omnipresent, he's everywhere, within us, without us, omniscient, all-knowing. Okay. And he agreed, yeah, definitely, that's in the Bible. I agree, I believe that. I said, okay. But this other belief you have, I have a problem with, and that is that if anyone is asked to accept Jesus into their heart and they don't do it, they don't accept that, they're going to go to hell and suffer the tortures of hell for, I don't know whether it's indefinitely, it's a long time, and it doesn't sound like fun. And I said, "You believe that?" And he said, "Yeah, I do. And I said, "Well, what about if they're a little child and they've been brought up as a Hindu or a Muslim, or their parents have told them something completely different, and they trust their parents, they love their parents have protected them their whole lives, so naturally they believe their parents. And you come along, or one of your friends who believes the same thing, and tells them just once, oh look, if you accept Jesus into your heart, then you will go to heaven. And they don't believe you because they believe their parents, whom they've known their whole lives. And because of that, that child is doomed to go and suffer the torments of hell for all of eternity. You believe that? And he sort of said, yeah. He wasn't very comfortable at this point. And I said, how can you believe that, and that this is the law that God has created, and at the same time believe that God is all-loving, all-wise, all-knowing, all-powerful? It's not possible. You can't have both. Sorry, you've got to either believe that God is cruel and irrational and biased, which you just told me you don't believe because you believe that he's omnipotent and omniscient and kind and all-loving, or you can believe that you can't believe both because they're mutually contradictory. And by this point, he was looking very concerned about perhaps about the 2 years he just wasted studying this irrational nonsense. Anyway, we parted very good friends, and I hope he went on to question what he had been taught, because it really is very, well, it's a huge insult to God for a start, and it's very harmful, in my opinion. For everyone who knows, go on.
Many people in the Christian faith believe in the age of innocence, which goes to about 12. Some sects actually take it to about 8.
Yeah, but the same applies. I mean, you can, of course, what I'm using is like the sort of extreme example, but if you go up to an adult and their entire life, by everyone they know and trust, they've been told one thing, you tell them something that's apparently completely irrational and irrelevant, and just because they don't accept it, they're cursed forever for the rest of eternity. It's the same thing.
What about the ones who've never heard it all or never will?
Well, they have in some of the Christian orders, they have an out because they weren't offered.
So you've got to be offered and receive the gift.
Yeah, and if you reject it, then you're really cursed. You're really finished. I mean, you're in trouble. Okay, there's this wonderful cartoon. Oh, I should have had that here. There's a Native American in tribal dress, and some Christian missionaries coming and telling them, if you accept this, you'll go to heaven, and if you don't, you're going to go to hell. And they say, well, why are you telling me that? It's like they're not very happy about this. I just want to read a couple of these great comments. I just get back to the way of the pilgrim, where we started. Lord, the prayer is something like, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Yeah, according to the book, it starts off as, in Russian, or because this is a Russian Orthodox scripture. And the author is unknown. That's so interesting. Nobody knows who wrote it. He was some mysterious, saintly mystic. And it starts off with, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on my soul. And it's something like, because I'm a sinner or something. And then as he repeats it over the days and months, he shortens it and shortens it. And he has this routine. He has to repeat this passage like 10,000 times a day. And then he repeats it out loud, sort of mutters it. And he said he repeated it so much that his tongue became numb. I thought, wow, this guy's dedicated. And but it's and he has all these amazing, beautiful spiritual experiences, and he's just this incredible saintly person. We don't know who he was. It's a wonderful book. Highly recommended. Love this one. Oh my God! For everyone who curses his father or mother shall be surely put to death. That's an interesting perspective. And another contradiction. I often point out that one can never become Jesus, or we can come close to him, but Jesus lives in our heart. Yeah, this is peculiar. There are many irregularities in this Orthodox, and I don't mean Eastern Orthodox, I mean the traditional interpretation of the official Christian scripture. But I do want to make the point that there are these lovely mystical traditions within Christianity. But the dogma kind of contradicts those. This concept of God, this definition of God as being omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, To me, that's a really good definition of cosmic consciousness, Parama Purusha, as we would say in Sanskrit, supreme consciousness. Okay, we've got another new one here. Oh, all right. So we got some good, nice comments here. Thank you all for chiming in, and I appreciate this because honestly, I am no expert in this. In case you didn't figure that out already, I'm just a lay person interested in this, and because my mum was a Christian, my dad was an atheist, and it's sort of the culture I grew up in, and and there is this very interesting mystery. Maybe Jesus was a great yogi. That's always I found that fascinating. So I'm cheeky enough to give workshops on it to actual Christians, which is a bit of a cheek. So a lot of similar ideas. So this is back to where I was saying, it's sort of arguable that Jesus was a Buddhist monk because look at the parallels. Buddha fasted for 40 days and he went through all these temptations, and you can read about that in his story. Jesus did exactly the same thing. And it was down to the number of days, and he faced the temptations, right? So the concept of ahimsa is very taken very seriously in Buddhism, the first principle of Dhamma and Niyama, which is part of our belief system. So the Buddhists are, very much about non-harming. And this was Jesus's kind of revolutionary teaching. The Judaic tradition isn't about that. That's an eye for an eye, right? Jesus came along, new teaching, turn the other cheek. This is a very Buddhist sort of perspective. The morality of the Ten Commandments, of course, this is Old Testament, but it seems to have its root in the Dhamma concept, the principles of yoga. The meditation in the desert, in the mountains, the isolation, that's again a very sort of, well, not just Buddhist mystical, it's a very common idea in mystical traditions that, to go deeply into the self and connect to the divine, it's good to have a period of isolation and go into a deep meditation or deep prayer. Krishna does a story about his guru Ninkaroli Baba. No, I would love to hear it. Can you tell us, Satish?
Yes. Krishna Das was in India with Nimkarli Baba, and Nimkarli Baba kept saying, "You should meditate like Jesus."
Interesting.
And finally, they got together and they said, "So how does Jesus meditate?" And Nimkarli Baba was sitting down. And he started to say, and then he stopped. And it paused for for minutes, and they were wondering what he's going to say. And then the tears ran down his cheeks. 2 tears ran down his cheeks. And finally he said about Jesus, he lost himself in love.
Oh, wow.
He loved every single being in the universe. He never died. He lost himself in love.
Well, that is very beautiful. Thank you for telling us that. I'm a big fan of Neem Karoli Baba. I know some of his disciples, like Jao Tal and some others.
Mm.
And there's some really interesting stories about Neem Karoli Baba and what he said about Anandamurti, the guru of Anandamarga. But I'm not going to tell you those today.
I'd love to hear those. But he was, I'd love to hear that. But I know Christian says that he was very, very reverent of Jesus. He talked about Jesus a lot.
Yep. And of course, so did Yogananda, as you probably know, and his guru Sri Yukteswar. They wrote whole books on sort of a reinterpretation, or you say a yogic interpretation of Christian scripture. Yukteswar was a great scholar and expert in that. That's Yogananda's guru. This is a picture of St. Francis, and it looks like he's meditating maybe. And of course, there is a cave where St. Francis used to pray or meditate in SCC. And a friend of mine, another Dada monk, he went there, and this was before, you can't go there now, they've sort of fenced it off, but it was more accessible then. And he went and meditated in St. Francis Cave. And he said it was a really amazing experience. He felt this incredible atmosphere of devotion, and He had a fabulous experience.
One thing I would like to point out, you're pointing out the Ten Commandments being very close to the Yama and the Yama, which also sum up the golden rule that Christ put out. But also, historically, they have been able to link the Ten Commandments to the Code of Hammurabi, who was a Middle Eastern king, or I guess you would call it Middle Eastern now, king at right before the time of the Jews making their way from Egypt.
Right. So now that if you, that's yeah, you've really studied this stuff. That's pretty interesting.
I didn't really have much of a choice, but you know,
I know you
it's a
don't.
good knowledge base.
Yep, really useful. Well, it's interesting. Another day. So aren't these speculations about Jesus simply speculations? Well, the point. Okay, what's the value of this kind of? You can call it speculation. It's the value of it to me is that the Christian dogma has been used as an instrument of manipulation and oppression for 1700 years, 1800 years. And I think this needs to be disproven because I think it's a lie. Now, whether these speculations are correct in detail or not doesn't matter so much. Thank you, Kyla. There are many similarities from the Bhagavad Gita. I think, yeah, for sure. I agree. You can see a lot. Even the name, Krishna and Christos, or Christ, right? It seems very similar. But yeah, back to the why. What's the point of this? Yeah, the dogmatic version of Christianity, which the church has used to oppress and torture people and mount wars and justify all kind of horrors, it needs to be questioned and disproven. And the irrational parts of it that are used even today to confuse people, like this wonderful young man I met in Australia who was so sincerely a sincere spiritual seeker, and he was being led into just confusion and just in a completely pointless direction by these irrational beliefs. So whether or not it's possible to prove that Christ was a yogi or not is not, to me, okay, that's a good point. Christ is a title, not a name. Okay, thank you. Yeah, whether or not it's possible to prove that Christ was a yogi or that, to me, is not the main point. The main point to me is that the Orthodox story of the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, it's not possible that they're true. They're irrational, they contradict one another, and that what we have here is not that we want to deny that Christ was a great spiritual personality, but this is, to me, a much more likely version of what happened. It allows for the reality of Christ being a great spiritual personality, which a lot of people, naturally, they feel a sentimental attachment to that, and you don't want to take that away from them. But it gives people a way to believe that without believing that everyone else is cursed and going to hell, which is absurd and really damaging and divisive. And don't get me started. So that's kind of why I think there's a point to this. Another one, he said that St. Francis was the greatest of the spirit of the Christian saints, and a lot of people believe that anyway. He certainly was a great reformer. You could say he was born at a time when the Catholic Church was pretty bad, and he kind of created this reformist movement and really tried to bring it back to its roots, free of the kind of corruption and cruelty that was a part of the institution. And he was very successful in a way, and even to this day, if you look at the different Catholic orders, the Franciscan order is, you could say, the kindest, and in many ways really carries the spirit of Christ's love in a much more authentic way than, say, the Dominicans, who were responsible for the Inquisition. Well, them and the Jesuits between them. The Jesuits, yeah, they have pluses and minuses. But, yeah, so the other thing the commonality between the Christian tradition and the Buddhist and tantric yoga traditions is this cult of guru, this idea that you have this great spiritual master and they can really help you. They're very central to your spiritual development. That's a strong tradition in these Eastern spiritual traditions as well. This one I find very fascinating. I read this book by Saint Teresa of Avila. It's called The Interior Castle. So she was a disciple of Saint John of the Cross, and a very incredible woman. She used to levitate spontaneously. Interesting. Devotion to the Sacred Heart, the heart chakra. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So Krishna was referring to this Jesus prayer. So they're repeating the prayer. It's like a mantra, and they would shorten it to Christos, Christos, and they're focusing on the heart. This is a spiritual meditation, very similar to what we do. So Saint Teresa of Avila, yeah, she was a nun in Spain, and she would sometimes levitate spontaneously in church when she was in a devotional mood and flow, and in this bhav, we call it in Sanskrit. And they were unsure what to do with her because they thought she might be either possessed by the devil or she was a great saint, and some sort of council that sort of questioned her, and fortunately they decided she was a great saint. And she was under the tutelage of Saint John of the Cross, who was also a great Christian mystic. And she wrote this book, Interior Castle, which describes that it sort of uses this metaphor. It says that there's this castle which has 7 walls, and they're circular walls, and when you pass through the gate into each one, and each wall is like a barrier within your mind, and you reach a more elevated state because you're coming closer to God, who is in the central tower of the castle. And she just describes this whole process. She's clearly talking about her spiritual progress through different levels of spiritual experience. And if you take away all the sort of terminology and dogma, it's very good. It's very parallel to the 7 stages of samadhi that the yogis describe as the kundalini rises up the spine, and we go through different stages of spiritual trance, and ultimately the kundalini comes to the crown chakra, and that is a state of oneness where we are one with God, which is what she's talking about in her castle. So there's these, different terminology, different metaphors. I mean, the chakras themselves are a metaphor. You're not going to cut open a human body and find any chakras there. Yeah, that's an interesting one about Jesus having control over the liquid factor. I refer to that a little further on. So that's another parallel one. In fact, it comes right here. There was this great yogi, Totapuri, who lived in India I believe he lived in, the late part of at least he was known in the late part of the 19th century and early 20th century. He met with Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna, I believe. In fact, I believe he initiated Sri Ramakrishna into tantric meditation, and it's unknown, he seems to have lived for a very long time, like more than the oldest person in the world. And he was able to walk on water. He could survive underwater for an indefinite period, and which indicates that he had total control of the 2nd chakra, which controls the liquid factor. And Jesus, if he really walked on water, which he may have, he had the same power. Another power that we've read about Jesus doing, bringing Lazarus back from the dead, that is also a power of only the most very advanced yogis. So there's these, it's not like these powers or miracles that Jesus apparently performed are unique at all. They actually occur through history. Okay, I'm just hearing from Kayla. I was reading about people who have out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. So you say there's a life review, that they weren't judged. They judged themselves, attained more knowledge. They went through another reincarnation cycle if necessary. And if it wasn't their time yet, they were told the greatest pursuit is to love and go teach others. Interesting. Yeah, I'm unclear about the significance of near-death experiences. And I'm not qualified to get to a discussion of it anyway, but that's interesting. Now this one I found fascinating because this is it's the Gospel of St. Thomas. which is an apocryphal gospel. I mean, it's not accepted by the Catholic Church, but it's a well-known gospel. Seems to be very authentic. And it says, "And he took him and withdrew and told him 3 words." And I'm not saying these words were Bhavalam Kevalam, it's probably something else. Anyway, then Thomas returned to his companions, and they asked him, "What did Jesus say to you?" And Thomas said to them, "If I tell you one of the things which he told me, you will pick up stones and throw them at me, and a fire will come out of the stones and burn you up." So these were secret. This was a secret mantra, and he was sworn. He had taken an oath to keep this mantra secret. Okay, so this is an absolutely tantric practice that we're familiar with if you know these practices. I mean, we don't have fire coming out of stones and stuff, but apart from that, taking on sin. This is the big one. This is the big misunderstood piece of Christian teaching, in my opinion. The idea that one guru, any guru, can take on all of the sins of all of humanity for the rest of time is, in my mind, impossible. But the idea that a great guru can take on some of the sanskaras, as we call them in Sanskrit, or sins of their disciples, is absolutely a known power of great spiritual masters. And it's one of the reasons why the guru tradition, the guru-disciple tradition, is considered to be so important, that the guru can help the disciples by taking on some of their weight or burden of unresolved karmic reactions. And I've experienced it. There was a period when Anandamurti, my guru, he was in India, and this was, I believe it was 1981. I should have to check. Some of you might know, Pratik, you might know. So he declared this thing. He said, "Okay, I'm offering an opportunity to all of my disciples to come, and I will personally review their karmic condition, all their sanskaras, and I will take a significant portion of their sanskaras on myself." And he gave a special blessing and prescribed some practices, particularly yoga asanas. So many of our followers, his followers from around the world, flew to India and to take this opportunity, and I was fortunate enough to go there. And I got there, and there was many people waiting, and I got my turn. I came into the room, and our guru was there, and yeah, he gave me this special blessing and scolded me for whatever I'd done wrong, which is probably plenty of stuff. And I had this amazing feeling, especially when I left the room a while later. I felt like I was floating a couple of feet off the ground for days. I literally felt like this enormous weight that I didn't even know I'd been carrying for years and years had been removed, and it was an incredible experience. And yeah, so I'm absolutely convinced that a great tantric guru or spiritual master can take on the sins of the disciples, a portion of them, because I got plenty more, believe me. But this was very, very apparent. And not just me, there were thousands of us who went through a similar experience, and I spoke to many of them. So my understanding is that Jesus Christ did indeed take on some of the sins of his disciples. And then the story went on, and 200 years later, somebody decided, okay, let's make this story that he's the savior of the entire world, and he took on all the sins of everybody for the rest of time. Okay, that's a fantasy. But it's based in something real, which is straight out of the tantric tradition. So this is why I don't think this is just speculation. I mean, there's a ton of this stuff, that all these parallels. Now, a little light stuff, we're getting close to the end, but I just want to give you a little perspective. Some of you might have seen a film from the 1980s, I think it was, early 80s, called The Life of Brian, made by the Monty Python comedy group. And now this was actually banned by, or huge complaints from the church, because if you haven't seen the film, it's tremendously funny. I really recommend it. But what is it really about? It's a parody, not of Christianity or Christ. It's about a character called Brian, who was mistaken for Jesus. And the three wise men came and they got the wrong manger. There was the one where Jesus was born, and that was all. But there was another manger just nearby, and they came and there was this Brian boy, and people thought he was Jesus, and he wasn't, and he didn't want to be. And there's a really, really many funny stories around that. But what they were really doing, so they ended up having a lot of conflict with the Christian authorities, who were telling their followers not to go to the church, to the film. Of course, this gave a lot of great publicity to the film, and more people went to see it. It was hugely successful, and the church helped unintentionally. But I saw this great debate between the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was the head of the, I think it was the Archbishop of Canterbury in England, the head of the Anglican Church, and another Christian theologian, Malcolm Muggeridge, big intellectuals, and John Cleese and Michael Palin, who were two of the Monty Python group, and they are having this debate, and it's adjudicated by one of the popular news sort of commentators, interviewers in England at the time. And the point that the comedians are saying is, look, this is not about Jesus. This is about what he's been turned into, and how his teachings have been distorted and misinterpreted, and he's been misrepresented. And they have this, there's a couple, I've got a reminder here, so there's this scene where Brian has been pursued by the crowd, and they're all saying, oh, you're the Messiah, and he's saying, I'm not the Messiah. And his mother says, he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy, and this famous line. And then he's in his house, sort of trying to escape from all the hundreds of people that are trying to follow him and listen to his every word, and he's trying to get rid of them. And he says, I'm not Jesus, I'm not the Messiah. You've got to learn to think for yourselves. You're all individuals. And all these hundreds of people all chant in unison, we are all individuals, like a bunch of robots. It's classic. So obviously this is a parody of people not thinking for themselves, people indoctrinated by irrational dogmas and all these problems that we found with religion in general, not just Christianity, but dogmatic religion in general. And then there's another one I won't go into now about the People's Revolutionary Front of Judea. That's about sectarianism. So there's, and here's another one. And this one actually is fun because this is not about Christianity. This is about traditional Hindu intolerance of comedy. So there's this film this Mike Myers, so he's a pretty crazy American comedian. He made a movie called The Love Guru. And the response from this Orthodox Hindu priest was, I found this hilarious. So firstly, there was a period, there are Hindu religious leaders who, they're really upset with the idea, with Catholic, more enlightened Catholic teachers encouraging their pupils to find God through yoga. I thought, this is weird. But the movie one is even better. So the priest created this hierarchy of what happens to you if you watch the movie in terms of going to hell. So some of the fundamentalist Hindus have their own version of this, and it looks like this. So let's start from the bottom. If you're a seeker of God on the spiritual path and you know about the movie, you've heard of this bad, evil movie, the Love Guru, and you don't do anything to stop it, you get 5 demerit units, and you go to the first region of hell for 100 years. That's pretty severe. Okay, so that's... I love this. Okay, so Mike Myers is Canadian. Yeah, that's true. He's another great Canadian comedian is, of course, Jim Carrey is also Canadian, isn't he? So then, okay, another level of naughtiness to do with this movie. Watching it for entertainment, even after knowing the spiritual significance of it. Again, same, 5-minute units of punishment or demerit. And again, you go to the same region of hell, the first level, for 100 years, okay? Now, this one's slightly less serious, okay? Watching it for entertainment without knowing the spiritual science or the significance. You only get 2 units, and you go to the Nether region, Bhuvaloka, for 100 years. I'm not quite sure what the Nether region's like, but it's probably pretty awful, but not as awful as the first region of hell. And this one, if you actually made the movie, like if you were Mike Myers or anybody involved in the production, you get 30 units of demerits and you go to the second region of hell for 1,000 years. That sounds grim. So, don't you love it? So this is better than the movie. This is funnier than the movie, actually, as far as I'm concerned. Oh, God. So I think that Dogma, this sort of rigid, constricting, oppressive kind of limiting on people's thinking, it deserves to be mocked. I think comedies should be made about it, exposing it for its absurdity, to take away its power, because it has tremendous power. Dogma has tremendous power to harm people. And a really effective way to defang it, if you like, is to make fun of it. And I think this Hindu priest, actually did a pretty good job of it unintentionally. So I hope nobody took him seriously. I'm afraid some people did. So Dharma is kind of the opposite of Dogma. So Dogma is this, it's like placing a wall around what you're allowed to believe or think. And it stops us from understanding reality and the truth and ourselves and the important things. It's a barrier to enlightenment. Dharma is the opposite. Dharma is the path to enlightenment, and it's universal. We find it in all of the different great spiritual traditions at the heart of them all. And this is written about with great wisdom by Aldous Huxley in his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, and in his book, The Perennial Philosophy. Like drawing caricatures of Muhammad, well, that's dangerous. It's risky, but perhaps important, perhaps valuable. So it's clear to, I think, anyone that looks at this dispassionately, that there's no conflict between, if you put Jesus Christ and Krishna and Buddha and Anandamurti Neem Karoli Baba in the same room, they would get along wonderfully. They would not argue about some, detail of their teachings or their dogma. They're all emanating love. What's the problem? Yeah, right, Kayla. That's a grim one. The problem with religions and institutions is they mix Dharma and dogma. So they take something sublime and inspiring and uplifting, and that gives us meaning, gives people's lives meaning, and coming from some, the teachings of an enlightened person, and they add over the years all this irrational belief, primarily designed for crowd control. As we discussed in this first part of this, what is the main benefit? What's the main motive in propagating the idea that Jesus Christ took all the sins of the world on himself, and you can only get salvation through surrendering to him and confessing all your sins to whom? To the priest. So who has the power even over the kings? Dogmatic religion is a very powerful method of crowd control, and it's all about power. So it's misusing the beautiful teachings of Dharma and turning them into something to manipulate and control people and exploit them. Quote from George Fox: Then what had any to with the scriptures? I think there's a word missing there. Perhaps to do with the scriptures. As they came to the Spirit that gave them forth, you will say, Christ saith this, and the apostles say this, but what canst thou say? Art thou a child of light, and hast walked in the light? And what thou speakest is it inwardly from God? Yeah, very good point. George Fox, well, of course, George Fox. He's this wonderful Christian mystic. He lives in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. So that's the thing. Within each of these traditions, you have, in Islam, you have the Sufis and the wonderful Rumi and the great sages and saints of the Islamic tradition, and prior to that, the Sufis, I think. But then you also have this terrible, dogmatic, exploitative, rigid version of it, which is a political machine, basically, or a weapon of the political machine. And you have the same in Christianity and in Hinduism and even in Buddhism. I mean, look at the Buddhism. Buddhism is perhaps more innocent than most, but certainly not free of oppression and cruelty and exploitation. So what we have to do is, and the purpose of this for me is to understand which is which. Where is the pure essence in these teachings? That's the part I want. And for me, that's in the inward teachings, the secret teachings that I'm sure Jesus taught to his disciples. And that's what enabled them to connect to their spiritual essence that we all have within us. From Tagore, hey, you're still with us, Vijitamananda. From the solemn gloom of the temple, children run out and sit in the dust. God watches them play and forgets the priest. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Oh, George Fox is not the current. There's another Fox, Matthew Fox. Sorry, I'm getting them confused. George Fox lived in the 17th century, founder of the Society of Friends of the Truth, also known as Quakers. Really? I grew up a Quaker. My mum was a Quaker. I decided I wasn't a Quaker when I was 12, so I forgot who George Fox was. But of course I should have. If I was a good Quaker, I would have recognized that. Thank you both. These are beautiful. This Tagore quote, that's fabulous. I'm going to copy that. I want to keep that. Great. Yeah, Dharma is universal. There's only one Dharma for all of us, and that's where we're headed. I just want to tell you one story, and then I'm going to tell you the last thing, the juicy bit. I promised I'd tell you what, as far as I know, this is what Anandamurti said about Jesus Christ. But before I tell you that, one dear friend of mine, an Adara who was actually a mentor of mine, he was from a Greek family in Australia. He became a monk in Anandamaga in the early 1970s. And after a few years, he was assigned to Italy. I'll post that to everyone. Here is the Tagore quote. Sorry, that wasn't in the general. Okay, now it's in there for everyone. But this is not from me. This is from Dada Vijitamananda, who's with us, who's in Japan. He shared the Tagore quote. Really nice. So, my friend Dada Japa Siddhananda, and he was kind of my older brother. When I became a young new Dada, he was the one who taught me and trained me and guided me, and he was wonderful. So when he was a few years before this, he was assigned to Italy. And he spent 3 or 4 years in Italy, and he basically built Anandamaga from scratch in Italy into one of our most active areas, where we had many followers, many people meditating and propagating and creating cooperatives and health food shops and all kind of cool stuff. So he really was the instrument of all of that. Now he initiated into our meditation a Catholic priest. And this priest, his name was Devadatta, he became a devotee of Anandamurti. But he was also a Christian priest, a Catholic priest. And he went to India and he met Anandamurti, and he was, incredibly inspired, and wrote a book, which was in Italian. It was called Anandamaga as Seen by a Christian. And in this book, I got to read the first part of it. It had been translated into English. And I was really curious, because I'm thinking, wow, this guy's a Catholic priest. What does he think? He was saying that Anandamurti is the second coming of Christ. He's the new Messiah. That's his perspective. And he wrote it in the book. He absolutely believed this. He had met Anandamurti. He was actually introducing all his parishioners as a priest to Bhavanam Kevalam, Kirtan, half bath, sattvic diet, vegetarian diet, and all the Ananda Marga practices. He got into they banned the book. The day before it was released, it was to be published, the church banned it. And he managed to get a few copies out. And he went through many years of struggle. He wanted to be an acharya in Ananda Marga, but he didn't want to leave his priesthood. He felt he had made a sacred vow, and he wouldn't break it. So he remained in the church, and he kept some contact with Ananda Marga, but they really kind of sent him back for retraining and re-brainwashing, and he had a tough time. But what happened, we discovered years later, he became quite senior in the church over the years. I don't know what level he attained. He's passed away now, but he was very influential, in some area of the church, and he was teaching Ananda Marga, a modified version of Ananda Marga practices, and they were chanting. I want to go back to that. He would teach them to chant Christos Nam Kevalam, and even after he died, there are about, I think, 11 or 12 parishes in the part of Italy where he worked, where the priests are like acharyas. They have beards like us. They're basically a sort of Christianized version of Ananda Marga acharyas or teachers. They have all their parishioners dance kirtan and sing Christos Nam Kevalam. They do kind of simple meditation, but the priests, it looks like they're getting initiated somehow, and into the higher meditation. They propagate vegetarianism and asanas and all of the Ananda Marga practices and philosophy. They teach Jama Niyama and all this stuff. So I think that's a pretty cool story. And there are hundreds of them. Of the followers. There's, 500. It was a lot of people. But more than that, actually. There's a couple of thousand, I think. So one of my other friends, another Ananda Marga monk, he's in touch with them, and they invited him to come there and give a special workshop on, the sort of deeper meditation and stuff. So we have some connection with them, and that's pretty neat. So there you go. That's Italy. I love Italy. Okay, last thing. These are what I've been able to sort of glean from the various stories I've heard from other acharyas and magis and people who Baba spoke to personally. Thank you, Pratik, for contributing to this. So, this is what our Guru said about Jesus Christ. He said the 3 wise men that came from the East were actually Buddhist monks. And they have this tradition in Tibetan Buddhism, which is the form they would have been practicing from that part of the country, of the world, or related to that. Maybe, but that's before Tibetan Buddhism really became strong. But there were tantric Buddhist monks, and they have this tradition that the great lamas, there are signs that can show where they will reincarnate and where they will be born in their next life, and they go and locate them. So Anandamurti said they had identified this young baby as a reincarnated Buddhist Lama. He confirmed that yes, he spent those lost years in India studying under a Buddhist yogi. He was initiated into tantric meditation, a particular high form of meditation known as Kapalic meditation, which is part of what I practice, by a Kashmiri tantric Buddhist monk. So he was quite specific. He did not die on the cross, and he said a disciple actually took his place. So that's devotion for you. And he returned to India as a prophet, and as recognized as a great prophet, great guru, and is buried in Hazrat Bal in Kashmir. And I'm not sure if that's actually the location of the tomb. I want to check on that. So that's what Anandamurti said, as far as I can tell. As I said, this is, what is it? Apocryphal. It's an unofficial gospel. So you can, you're welcome to pass it on, but make sure you make it clear that this is not in the written scriptures or writings of Anandamurti. This is hearsay, all right, and may not be acceptable in a court of law. But I've gotten this from usually multiple sources, at least on most of this. There's multiple sources. He seems to have talked about this on more than one occasion. And that's the end of the story. So I'm going to, I believe that's the last slide. Let me just check. The most important thing. The other thing he said about Jesus Christ, he said Jesus Christ was the gentlest soul ever to walk on the earth. And that's why these 2 workshops are called the Gentlest Soul. And that's enough for me, at least. I'm convinced. You can think whatever you want.
I'm willing to trust it, since the Dalai Lama has said of Anandamurti that he was the wisest man to ever walk the face of the planet.
Sorry, can you say that again?
I said I'm willing to trust it, since the Dalai Lama has said of Anandamurti that he was the wisest man to ever walk the face of the planet.
Really? Where did you get that from? I've never heard that.
A few years ago, I talked to 3 or 4 different people I was working through with the temporary agency. I was like, really? That's how I actually got exposed to Anandamurti's name to begin with.
Can you see if you can recall who the source of that and send an email that to me, please?
They were just guys I was working with, and we were all discussing the same topic. Okay. I mean, as far as who actually heard that or recorded it, I will research it for you real quick.
Thank you. I would really like to know the source of that. There's definitely, there's other stories like that, but I haven't heard that the Dalai Lama said anything. I'd really like to know that. I just want to make one announcement before we finish. So Vistara Circle is, organizing and sponsoring these online training programs, and there's quite a lot of them. You can see they have a beautiful website, really nice YouTube channel. There's a lot of great videos there, and a lot of classes and that every week from different teachers. I'm just one of them. And it does cost some money to run, so there is a fundraising going on, and since this is Giving Tuesday, please take a look at the chat, and you'll find there a link where if you want to contribute something, there's a goal of $2,500, which is to run a lot of the online services and so forth, and it's enough to cover for 6 months. Wow, means everyone's working for free. Okay, pretty much. Maybe we're paying for paying someone to do some of the design work, but it's a lot of donated labor there. So if you would like to donate some cash to help that will happen, you're very welcome to. Just go and click on that link. And thank you all so much and I'm really enjoying this, how we're getting so much great input from so many of you, because some of you are definitely more well read in this area than I am. So I'm learning a lot as well.